guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to give you my overview of what age regression is. Before we start, I want to make it clear that I am not a therapist, and all of my information is coming from research, as well as what I've come to understand from my own trauma-centered therapy and from talking to my therapist, who is a trauma specialist. There are a lot of things I'm not going to be able to cover in this video, so instead I'm going to be focusing on the definition of age regression, personal experience, and sort of an overview as what I've come to understand as the 4 types of age regression. Before we get into it though, I want to go over what age regression is not. Number 1, age regression is not, never is, sexual. In the same vein, age regression is not a kink. It bears no relation or affiliation with the CGL, ABDL communities, etc. I'm not going to go into any of what those are. It is also not a mental illness, at least not in and of itself, but it can be a symptom of mental illness. But more on that later. It is not always a positive and happy experience, and it is not the same thing as pretending to be younger. Now, with that covered, let's move on to a definition. Age regression is a retreat or a reversion to a younger state of mind. This retreat can be a few years younger than a person's actual age, or it can be much earlier to early childhood or even infancy. Age regression can be caused by many things, but in general it can be divided into 4 subcategories. Those categories are involuntary, voluntary, symptomatic, and therapeutic. These categories, though, are not mutually exclusive, and someone can experience more than one at once. For the sake of this video, let's start with the negative and then work our way towards the positive. Symptomatic age regression is pretty much what it sounds like, age regression as a symptom of something, usually mental illness. Age regression, from what I've read, is most commonly a symptom of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or other trauma-based disorders, but it is also seen with BPD, autism, anxiety, etc. But like I said, I'm not a therapist, so I'm primarily going to be invoking my personal experience and understanding. So this will be primarily related to trauma, as I am diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. With PTSD and complex PTSD, especially when it comes to childhood trauma, parts of our brain and psychological development can essentially become trapped at the age or the time the trauma occurred. Many people who have experienced childhood trauma still feel like a part of them is still trapped at the age the trauma occurred, or like a part of them is still trapped in that place experiencing the trauma. Many of us feel developmentally stunted, lost, and small. The ways in which our brains learn to react and defend ourselves are neurologically conditioned, and we inadvertently revert back to those reactions even after the trauma or abuse has ceased. For example, in my abusive household, there was a lot of yelling and slamming, etc. So now when someone yells at me or I hear an unexpected loud noise, because of the way that my brain has been conditioned through fight or flight and the activation of my sympathetic nervous system, I react to the stimuli, like the yelling, the same way I did as a kid. I might panic or start crying, and my brain is automatically preparing itself for something horrible to happen, even if in reality the current situation that's going on is like no big deal. This also triggers me to regress. I immediately feel like a scared child, and it's incredibly vulnerable and overwhelming. My whole mind changes. I can no longer think or act like an adult, even if I try to and fight what's going on. In my personal life, I have to let partners and close friends know about this and how to handle it if it happens, because that is how affected I get. This kind of age regression is involuntary, which brings us to the next category, which is, of course, involuntary age regression. This is regression that comes on spontaneously and age regression that you cannot control. However, it isn't always necessarily negative, though it tends to be when it's coming from a symptomatic trigger. However, though, it can also occur in positive situations. For example, you're in the children's section of a toy store or a bookstore and you see a book or a toy that reminds you of one that you loved as a kid, or just one that sparks your interest now. As a result of that, you involuntarily regress, and suddenly you're experiencing like the childlike wonder and joy that you did as a kid. Now, I think it's important to note that of course anyone can experience nostalgia, but that is not what age regressing is. This is where things tend to get a bit convoluted because it's kind of hard to explain. When you regress, you know it, and you can feel your whole mind change and even your body, but it's hard to actually put that experience into words for someone who doesn't experience it. But I just want to make that distinction that things like nostalgia or like still being able to experience little sparks of childlike joy and wonder is not the same as age regressing. When you're regressing, your brain is in a totally different place. Up next, we're going to talk about voluntary age regression. This is where you're someone who regresses or has the psychological predisposition to being able to regress, and you do it intentionally. This is where we get into the fourth and last and best category, which is therapeutic age regression. Depending on your personal circumstances, you might know this better as regression for self-help or regression as a self-help and healing tool. For myself and many others, therapeutic regression is a chance to relive your childhood or parts of it in an innocent, safe, and controlled environment. When coupled with trauma therapy and in-session therapy such as EMDR, this type of regression can literally rewire your brain and decondition your stress responses, making it less likely for your PTSD symptoms and negative regression to become triggered. When coupled with CBT or DBT, this type of regression can also help undo the effects of gaslighting or other internalized negative self-talk. For example, some of the sentiments that I'm currently working on undoing for myself are my trauma makes me dirty and gross, or parts of my abuse were my fault. And you can make your regression as general or specific as you want in this way. For example, as a kid, I was not allowed to make noises or talk when I was playing or in general, and now when I'm playing with toys, etc., I talk and yell a little and make sound effects, and it feels incredibly liberating and almost euphoric after having such a basic thing stifled up for so long. Being able to have my voice out there, even just in that capacity, has in turn made it easier for me to stand up for myself in real life during real conflicts. And whether the general population wants to admit it or not, most people are deeply affected by their childhoods, even if they haven't experienced trauma. But of course, way more so if they have experienced trauma. And all of us has an inner child who needs nurturing, and far more than just nurturing if, like me, you've experienced horrible abuse and trauma. And now for a frequently asked question. Is age regression safe? The general answer is yes. There's no inherent risk in age regression. Like all therapies, all tools, even all self-care, it needs to be used correctly and consciously so that it doesn't become an unhealthy escapism or negatively detract from the rest of your life. Therapeutic age regression is also best done when you have a good therapist who you're actively working alongside, and it is also best done in a comfortable and safe environment. That being said though, what is most important is being in tune with yourself. As long as you're being safe and feeling like you're being helped in a positive way and a productive way, you're on the right track. However, if you feel like your regression is primarily symptomatic, out of your control, or strongly negatively impacting your quality of life, definitely only proceed therapeutically under the direction of a mental health professional who is trauma-informed. Now, okay, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, and so far hopefully everything has made sense, but if some of the more psychological concepts are out of your wheelhouse, here are a few books that I really recommend that I think will help you understand. I will also list them in the description, but I will show them to you now so you can pause and look them up if you want. Again, these are all primarily obviously complex PTSD and trauma related, so you might need to dig around for resources that are more applicable to your situation. And again, this is PTSD and trauma based because that's where my experience and my diagnosis is. I also want to give a few real world examples from my life just to wrap up this segment of the video and hopefully make it make more concrete sense. Say I'm triggered because I hear my neighbors fighting loudly. The situation makes me triggered, and so I symptomatically age regress. Feeling scared and small and desperately in need of comfort, I take that horrible feeling, come inside, go in my room, and cuddle with a stuffed animal, and turn on a show like Bluey where the adults have healthy and calm dynamic even when conflict is present. Even though I'm still feeling scared and like a young child, I start being soothed by the childhood comforts that I'm surrounding myself with. And by immersing myself in these sort of innocent, happy, calming things, I feel my nervous system begin to calm down and my brain slowly come back to normal. That's one example of how you can actively use your symptomatic regression and maneuver it and turn it into therapeutic. Another example of when regression has been helpful for me has to do with when I was in college. During super stressful times with exams, I would schedule 2 hours of regression time a night or every few nights. It would completely shut off my adult stress brain, and I'd be able to immerse myself in calm and innocent childlike activities and be completely in that mental state for a while. And being able to go there in such like a deep way gave my brain and my nervous system such a huge break that I then did better on my exams than I would have if my cortisol and stress levels were kept at a peak where I was getting so stressed I could barely like function or focus on the work I was trying to get done. So anyways, let's wrap up there. I really do hope this made sense. I felt like this was an important video for me to make sort of as a reference point for people who are exploring my channel or my content, or especially for people who are maybe having one of my videos be their introduction to age regression. I also feel like a lot of the resources that other regressors make are good, but they don't really go too in depth or really talk about like the more psychological aspects. Obviously, like I said, I'm not a therapist, and there's like, I can make hours and hours long things of talking more about the way that trauma specifically affects the brain and stuff, but I hope this was like a good enough overview of that. I also felt like it was important to make with all of the misinformation online, especially coming from other communities or from people who have no frame of reference whatsoever when it comes to like therapy and trauma. And please remember that your opinion and the opinions of your trusted and knowledgeable clinical team are the only opinions that matter, and never those of strangers on the internet. Psychology and also facts about the brain are on your side, as well as the positive experiences and immense therapeutic progress of people like me. So yeah, I really hope that this video helps. If you want to know more about PTSD in general, like I said, look at the books that I recommended. If you want to know more about age regression in general, do look online. There are some good resources out there. I find that Healthline has some easy and like accessible short articles if you want to check them out. They do a pretty good job at like explaining without like getting too like nitty-gritty with it. But that is all for today, guys. You're so valid and so strong, and I love you, and I'll see you in the next video.